Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our session today. Going to go ahead and kick things off here in just one moment with a little bit of housekeeping. Give me just 1 second, please. All right. So today's session is a forum, and we'd love to have your questions. Please go ahead and use the Q&A tab in the top right corner to throw those questions in. We'll try and pay attention to the chat too, but I know it moves really quickly. We've got some folks moderating to help with that. We've also got a button up there for a request a demo or schedule a meeting with us. If something here piques your interest and you'd like to chat more with someone at GitHub, we'd love to do that. Go ahead and use that button to do so. As far as viewing goes, hopefully if you're seeing this and hearing this, you're already having no issues, but we do recommend Chrome. Try refreshing if you're having issues with the stream at all. Disabling the VPN can also really help, or an incognito window. And if you have any additional issues, there's a docs tab in Goldcast that you can use. We'd be happy if you feel comfortable and would really like to have you answer or ask your questions in video Q&A later on. Here's the steps on how to do that. You are also more than welcome to just put things in the Q&A tab or the chat. We'd be happy to answer them that way as well. And then just a reminder that we've got some more great events happening throughout the rest of the week. We'd love to have you at Thursday and Friday's events as well, focusing on security and collaboration. All right. So with that, today we are talking about removing developer roadblocks and streamlining productivity with GitHub. I'm joined by my wonderful solutions engineering colleague, Kevin Alwell, who is a principal solutions engineer here at GitHub. He's going to be showing you a lot of functionality later on. And then I'm Jessi. I'm a director for field services enterprise products here at GitHub. So I'm going to be kicking things off with a little bit of level setting and showing you some features from sort of a product manager side of things. We've also got Christopher Harrison on, who's one of our senior enterprise advocates here at GitHub. He'll be helping to kind of moderate the chat. You'll probably see him in there and helping us with the Q&A at the end as well. So welcome everyone again. And I'm going to go ahead and jump into just a little bit of, like I said, sort of level setting, what we're going to talk about and mostly show you and let you ask questions about today, which is velocity and productivity with GitHub. Especially don't take our word for it, right? We want to tell you what we've heard from customers, and we want to show you what the product looks like. Not going to kill you with slides here. And then definitely at the end, like we said, go through the Q&A. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat. Go to the Q&A tab up at the top there. To make sure that those get seen so that we can answer them at the end. All right. So what are we going to talk about today? I have 4 kind of general big areas that we're going to talk about that help with velocity and productivity for people using GitHub. The first one that we're going to touch on is GitHub issues, but also how they integrate with our built-in project management. Not something that a lot of people actually know about, but we've got a really flexible but powerful work planning and tracking system right in GitHub that you can use anytime that you're using GitHub to do the rest of your work. And it's really cool. So I wanted to take a chance to give you just a peek at that. We're, of course, going to highlight GitHub Actions, which is our CI/CD and workflow automation platform. No extra infrastructure overhead required to use that. Kevin's going to show a great example of that, as well as GitHub Codespaces, which are cloud-hosted full development environments, nearly instantly on anytime that you want, even if you're bootstrapping a really big project, and you can pre-configure them so there's no more of that works on my machine kind of issue that you get sometimes with developer environments. And of course, we're going to talk about CoPilot. Everybody wants to talk about CoPilot right now. It's your AI pair programmer for GitHub and helps provide contextual coding suggestions right in your editor as you work. So why are these important? Well, some of these help your devs get up and running faster, right? So for the example from Duolingo, which you may have seen earlier on today in the session, they increased their developer speed by 25%. Using CoPilot, rather, helping to limit some of that context switching, having to not produce boilerplate code, right? Get started with the problems that really matter, actually work on things that are going to contribute to solutions for your customers. Similarly with Synergy, using GitHub Codespaces helped expedite their developer onboarding when a new developer came onto a project or to the company in general, from a couple of weeks to literally 15 seconds. See something very similar here at GitHub, right? Where bootstrapping the GitHub monolith that we run github.com on could take hours to weeks. And we also have that down to minutes or even seconds here. We then want to move into having built-in deploys happen, right? You get your kind of onboarding going, you get your developers running, and now we want to make sure that they are able to frequently deploy in a nice way that makes them happy. So Pinterest saw an 87.5% decrease build time, moving to CI/CD with GitHub Actions. Similarly with LinkedIn, their developers started rating their processes for CI/CD with a 40% increase in that NPS score, moving to using GitHub for those processes. Blue Yonder has a 30-minute deploy window, down from an entire day with that automation of CI/CD. And at CH Robinson, they were able to move to 162% more deployments after adopting GitHub. So these are some real numbers, right? Things that you would love to be able to go tell your leadership, hey, we have this return on investment. I'm not making any of this up. This is what these customers have really told us that they've been able to achieve with GitHub. So we'd love to be able to talk to you about how to achieve that for your organization as well. And then lastly, thinking about not only the internal piece, making internal folks happier and more productive, but how do we actually ship some of that to our customers? We have Walmart that are shipping up to 14,000 times in a month with GitHub. 3M went from 400 deployments over 60 days to 15,000, and their developers became 2 times more productive when they moved everything to GitHub. Intel saw a 216% pull request growth year over year, so more than doubling the number of times that people collaborated on changes. And Nationwide saw a 90% reduction in merge times. So what do they actually say about these different things? For issues and projects, we have Shopify that's also using this quite heavily. And they really like that they get this high-level overview across all their projects, able to triage priorities quickly, and it's familiar to their developers. Codespaces helps KPMG to be able to deal with lots of different requirements. They don't have to do all of the tedious error-prone stuff, and they can just get right into actually doing real work. GitHub Actions at TELUS has saved their developers around 2 hours per week, and at scale, that multiplies to a large number of savings, both in hours and in dollars. At Skyscanner, they report that their engineers are seeing, ability to actually work on business logic. Like I said, spend time on the questions that matter most, that actually deliver value to the customer. Similarly, at the Home Depot, being all in on GitHub, they now are able to average about 4,000 commits daily, which they never saw before with other systems that they were using. And lastly, at Mercedes, they say that just having that single platform for all of these things, right? Putting all of these pieces together are a great advantage for them, being able to work together, inner source, right? Not repeat each other's work, being able to collaborate and learn from each other. These are all the advantages that we really see, again, moving that velocity needle forward and keeping the happiness while you're at it. Not just driving people to work more, but doing it in an effective way that allows them to work on the greatest challenges and interesting problems that they want to solve as developers. All right, so we're going to switch over here now to talk a little bit about a day in the life of somebody working on GitHub, right? What does this actually look like? I'm going to play the role today of a product manager, right? Somebody who's maybe not in coding every day on GitHub, but needs to know what their developers that they work with are doing, and maybe wants to manage some work while they're at it, right? And so I'm in my applications repository here, and I'm starting out my day, and I say, all right, I've got sprint planning later on. Let's check on how our work is going and if there's anything new that needs to be assigned to anybody to work on. So I'm going to come over to my projects tab here. I'm going to jump into my tracking board that we've got for my AR/PR integration application. It looks like we've got a couple of items here that don't have anybody assigned to them yet to work on. It looks like my engineering manager, Kevin, probably is the one to work on these. So let's get him assigned. I can do that very quickly here just from the same view, right? And so I could go down the list and I could do assignments for anybody I needed to right in the same view. Let's say that we're going to start out our sprint here by doing a little bit of could do the same thing. We can even create a new field or view right from the same board if we wanted to. Now we might move into thinking about, okay, I want to make sure that my work is balanced across my work streams, or I want to see where the different velocities are for my different work streams. I've got 3 of them here. I've got an automation work stream, an app framework work stream, and a delivery work stream. It looks like right now the bulk of the work is being done in that app framework work stream. So maybe, I wanted to think about providing them some extra developers to share time, something like that, because they've got a lot of work going on. And if we move over to our roadmap view, we can see that a lot of that work, again, is being centered during the current sprint that we're in. So we have both kind of categorical views that we can look at. We can actually take action on some of those views, and we can look at what the work looks like over time. So we can see here, really exciting stuff. If we jump into one of these epic items, we can even configure subtasks that are dependent on top-level items. So we've got an epic here with subtasks that we want to check off as they are completed. All of these roll up to completion of this single epic. And this is all done right in GitHub with the issues and pull requests that your developers are used to using. It's really exciting stuff. And I'm going to switch over now, I think, to letting Kevin talk a little bit about how he might deliver as that engineering manager on some of the work that's actually going to be done on this app.
Right on. Thank you very much, Jessi. Hello, everyone. I've had a lot of fun already interacting with you in the chat. It's been great to see that we have so many developers present from all over the world. And I think there's actually been some specific requests already. And so feel free to interact with us directly in the chat. And I'm fortunate to be joined by so many great folks who are moderating that chat. So thank you for doing that as well. One of the things that I'd like to address that came up, while Jessi was kind of talking us through some high-level points across the platform was CoPilot X. And I just want to share that CoPilot X is really a vision for how AI and large language models will manifest across the entire platform. It is not a single specific feature. Rather, it is a collection of capabilities that's kind of set the vision for what may be integrated in the future in the platform. For example, an enhanced docs interface where rather than searching for documentation or maybe supplemental to the search feature, you'll be able to have more of a dialogue with the documentation. Or I think a lot of folks have been curious about the synergy between ChatGPT and GitHub CoPilot, when they should be used together, when they should be separate, and what the best use cases are. And so CoPilot Chat, I think, is a nice way that vision for large language model integration into the developer workflow manifests. Okay, and so that's somewhat of a side tangent. And for all those dark mode lovers, I'm bringing us back. Take off your sunglasses, Jessi. There was a lot of spicy opinions about dark mode or not in the chat, so it's been a lot of fun. So let me talk you through the use case that we're going to demo together, and I think it's a pretty interesting one. We built it specifically for Galaxy and specifically for this session, so hopefully you enjoy the conversation and learn something along the way. Obviously, that's the goal, is to have you walk away with a little bit more knowledge than you came into the session with. And so if that's achieved, then we're happy, and hopefully you are too. So basically what we've built here is pretty simple. We built a GitHub action that listens for when pull requests are opened against the main branch, and it synthesizes the change that's been proposed in the PR, and it contextualizes the PR with that change. Okay, and so it says, hey, this pull request is about X, and here's the effect of the downstream application. And so basically, you'll be able to roll this action that's built in-house for your organization across, roll it out across your entire org for every repository. Okay, and so this demo has a few layers. The first thing I'd like to do with you is just to see this thing live once, so it's less opaque, more tangible. So we're actually going to see the demo live once. Then we're going to go into more production-like experience. So actually, in development mode as a developer building an application. So it's going to get a little bit more complex. And then what I actually wanted to show you as kind of the third layer of the demo here is what the developer experience was for the developer like yourself, Ryan, out there. I saw you in the chat, and Shaker and so many others. We're actually building the automation that serves the developers across your organization. right? And so I wouldn't focus so much centrally on what this integration does specifically. It's an interesting use case, but it's also like, okay, well, what tools are being used along the way and how can that possibly impact my own developer workflows? Okay, so that's the whole preface that I'll give you. Hopefully things come into vision as we're actually kicking the tires on this thing. And so you may be familiar with this interface. This is a repository landing page. This is an internal repo, so that means it's public only to the members of my organization. It's really just a test repo I was using in order to prepare for this conversation, this event that we're having now. And the first thing that you'll notice is we have our workflows directory nested inside .github, right? And so if I just poke in there for a moment and show you what the GitHub Actions workflow looks like, we'll take a moment to do that together. And hopefully the sight of code isn't intimidating to you. I saw a lot of devs here, so I feel like it's not, and that's great because we're going to spend some time in it together. So you have the name of your workflow here, right, as AI test. It's triggered when we open a pull request against our main branch. And it runs on the GitHub hosted Linux machines. And so GitHub Actions does provide compute on the GitHub platform. So you don't have to actually run those agents locally or as part of some gigantic, environment. But I think the bulk of what we're actually talking about together here is these steps. So starting at line 25, but in particular line 27. And that's where I'm invoking this AI PR integration tagged to a specific version. And what you'll notice is that that Octo demo is actually the name of the organization that this repo lives within. And so that's how I've published an action that's consumable exclusively to developers within my own organization. And obviously I'm using the native GitHub secret store to store secrets to make the integration work. So let's take a moment together and actually run this thing and see what it does. And then we'll just continue to layer on the complexity and again, go back to what it took to actually build this. And we're going to use AI to build AI. It's pretty meta, but hopefully it keeps things interesting and fun. And so maybe your experience here might be, I don't know, you're going into a repository and you want to scaffold out a workflow to do some code scanning. So I might click into my security tab. I might look to enable code scanning and I might go to add a tool. And so this interface is actually really nice. It kind of flipped us back to the Actions tab, but I have all these workflow templates available to me. Now, these workflow templates are published by folks like Sneak and different service providers. In this case, we have GitHub for CodeQL. But you could also publish your own workflows for consumption across your organization to package up those modules that are GitHub Actions for consumption by devs. Or as a developer, you have some idea how to do something useful with the new language models, make that available to your org, right? That's kind of the truest form of intersourcing. So again, let's go ahead and scaffold out this CodeQL analysis workflow. So I'm going to go ahead and hit configure here. And I'm going to just commit this change back to my repository. I might make the commit message something like, I don't know, introduce code scanning via CodeQL. And it might say something like leverage CodeQL to scan. Rather than committing to the main branch, I'm going to commit to a branch for us together now. We'll call it together now. Galaxy together now. I'll go ahead and propose the change. Open the PR. And so what ought to happen is the actions that are listening for the pull request event should begin to trigger. And they'll run on the GitHub Actions. So there we go. We see that now this workflow has been queued. I'll go ahead and click into details. What we'll see is all the jobs are getting set up. In this case, it's just a single job, which is test AI. And we're going to go ahead and run through it. And so you have your live logs available to you here. And it looks like it actually may have already completed. So the live logs are doing some catch up. So I'm going to go back to my pull request and see whether or not this was successful. Okay, great. So this actually achieved exactly what we were hoping for. And I just wanted to illustrate what this integration does before we go ahead and get any further with it, right? So I opened this pull request that introduces a code scanning workflow. I said a little bit of something about it, but it's probably not enough for Jessi to come in here and see what the heck I'm doing inside this repo when I'm proposing a change. And so the GitHub Actions automation picked up the pull request, synthesized the PR and its content, and then output a comment that describes more closely what exactly this PR does and its impact to the downstream application. So I'm not going to read that to you, but it does something like just provide additional context on what SAST is, the types of vulnerabilities that you can have, and ensuring that your application meets the security standards set by the organization. And that was generated on the fly. I had no idea what was going to be output. I think similar to what you've probably already experienced with other large language models that you've tested, maybe through the ChatGPT interface, from OpenAI. So let's go ahead and level up here a little bit and look at a more sophisticated use case. And so this is a repository that we affectionately demo all the time from, which is the bookstore demo. And I want to show you what the bookstore demo is before we go ahead and make any changes to it. So maybe the first thing that I'll do is see if any environments have been tagged back to the repo and have been actively deployed. And so obviously that's the case here. And I can see my deployment history. If I want to actually view my deployment, this has been deployed to Azure. And believe it or not, the bookstore repo represents an application that's a bookstore, which is wonderful. And so if we want to look through our bookstore, we can do that. We can see different titles and status, et cetera. So we're actually going to build a very specific feature together, which is the rating feature. So if you're on a bookstore, you probably want to see what people think about the different books. It's a good testament to whether or not that book's worth your time in reading. Okay, and so we're going to add a feature here. Now, before we go ahead and do that, there's a few things that we ought to do to set the table. I think the first thing is let's make sure that this repo has the workflow that we just ran in the other project inside the .github directory. I actually don't think it does, but we'll check it out together and maybe use a nice Easter egg that folks are less familiar with in order to introduce it before we go ahead and implement that rating feature. So I'm going to go ahead into my .github directory, which is where my actions workflows will live. Let's see if my AI workflow already lives here. And if it doesn't, I think that's probably okay. But yeah, let's go back and copy this workflow. So I'm going to go ahead and look at this raw workflow, going to copy that, and then I'm just going to launch this lightweight VS Code editor directly from my repo by pressing dot. So if you want to test this out, just go to any of your repos, press the dot key on your keyboard, and it should launch this kind of lightweight Visual Studio Code. And I'll be able to go to my workflows, create a new file, maybe call it like AI Galaxy.yaml. And I'll just paste in what we had in the other repository. I'm pretty sure it works because we tested it together. And I'm pretty sure I've already seeded these secrets inside the repo. So again, what should happen here is when I open a pull request against my main branch, a Linux machine should kick off the following steps, which is to check out the latest version of this repo and use this AI PR integration at the tag version at v1. Okay, so that's the task at hand. Let's go ahead and commit this back to our main branch. Something awesome is afoot. So let's go ahead and commit and push that. And I think we can actually just click to go back to our repo. I'll go ahead and close out these other repos to keep things nice and simple. Okay, great. So now we should have that workflow. If I go back to .github, I go to my workflows, I see AI Galaxy, which is the AI workflow. Awesome. Okay. So now if I'm a developer picking off my daily tasks that have been assigned to me by Jessi or anybody who's actually driving us to be productive here rather than watching YouTube videos and scrolling Twitter, I can go ahead and I can launch a code space. And you can see that I've already done that. So I've kind of warmed up a code space for us. And just, again, to reiterate what that capability is, it's basically a VM that's been deployed on your behalf that has Visual Studio Code installed on it and any of the dependencies of your application that you've already defined in order to run that application the first time. So I think those are the two things that are, oh yeah, of course, also your source code of your repository. So those are really the three things that your code space gets scaffolded with. And I'll talk you through the process for configuring a code space. But one of the things you ought to know is how you can launch it with options. And so new with options allows me to launch a code space with, from different branches, for example, with different configurations. I can launch it in any specific region if I want, for performance. And of course, one of the really nice things here is that I can select the resources that my machine is able to run with. And that's really useful because they don't have to ship me, a higher power laptop. I'm just kind of utilizing the power of the cloud here to have access to these resources. And what you'll notice is that we've actually defined, so we've codified what's required to run this application. And so we don't allow 2 core machines for this specific repo. And so somebody was calling out like, hey, how do you realize that level of maybe velocity, speed to productivity, if you will, with code spaces? And it's really because you can codify the app dependencies and you have access to n number of resources in order to run the application for the first time. So I'm going to go ahead and launch my code space. which is inevitably stopped for me. And so one thing I want to call out here that I think is great and really a good demonstration of eating your own dog food, if that's the expression. GitHub adopted Codespaces for our own development as soon as Codespaces kind of shipped internally. And what they were able to do with that by codifying the dependencies, and so they're all installed at runtime, is they were able to reduce the onboarding time to productivity to run that application day zero from something like, I don't know, I think it was hours down to minutes, because now you can install the Codespace or run the Codespace and all those dependencies are automatically installed. But minutes is still too long when you want to spin up your IDE, as you well know. And so we did develop a feature which is called pre-builds. And pre-builds are awesome because it basically gives you a warm standby of your machine to, again, kind of further accelerate access to the IDE. Right on. Okay, so now we have this VS Code and a VM somewhere, and maybe the first thing I want to do is like run my application. I can do that by hitting function F5. And I'm going to forward the application to a port that I could then open on my browser here. And so we're running this application that's being forwarded to port 8080. So if I go to the URL that's getting forwarded here, it's going to say connected to the port. Beautiful. Okay, so here's the bookstore deployed, or not necessarily, actually it's not deployed, it's being run from my local dev environment. So where you saw it before was deployed to Azure. This is my local dev environment, right? And so what I actually want to do is pretty simple here. What I want to do is run a piece of automation prepared for this demo that allows me to introduce that feature I was talking to you about, which is the star rating. So I'm not going to spend your time actually implementing that with you. We are going to write some code later with CoPilot, so fear not. Okay, I actually did that. Oh, good. Okay, it was on the, it did check out to a separate branch for me. Good news. Okay, friends, so maybe what I'm going to do now is let's rerun this. And so we're going to start up the application again now with the code changes that happen under the hood. I realize you didn't get to see that get implemented, but hopefully if I refresh my screen here, you'll see what it looks like. And so I see my books, I see the author, the status, and I don't have any idea whether or not you enjoy the book as much as you think I will. And so there we go. Boom, we've implemented this amazing rating feature that shows us whether or not books are loved by the readers. Okay, so that feature has been delivered. So maybe what I want to do now is I want to open a pull request to introduce this back to the main branch, right? This is kind of a standard workflow. So let me go ahead and do that. So I might say add everything. What do we do? Introduce star rating feature to bookstore. Then I might say do this. Okay. Cool. So now we have this branch. Let's just go ahead and take this and drop it in there. Awesome. So now we actually have this new branch, which is feature bookstore rating. We're going to open a pull request against our main branch. And again, the whole purpose here was to kind of show you the developer experience in the workflow, but also that we get back to this point, now that we're introducing a feature in a more production-like environment, to see whether or not our AI integration is listening, right, that we introduced just a moment ago directly back to the main branch. So we might say something like, I don't know, provide a rating feature in the bookstore application so we know whether the book is loved by its readers. We go ahead and open a pull request there. And so we should start to see a series of checks get kicked off. Beautiful. So it's pretty immediate. So there's a series of checks getting kicked off automatically here because you have GitHub Actions in the background listening for events on the platform. In this case, it's pull request events. And the good news is I did see AI test here getting kicked off. And so hopefully that resolves in a moment and we should see the result of that back in our PR. But in the meantime, you might notice like this pending status across code scanning. And so we're also scanning, spoiler alert. So we're also scanning the auto scroll, spoiler alert. We're scanning for, AppSec type vulnerabilities with CodeQL. And again, you can always click into these things and check out the live logs as they're actually running. So in this case, CodeQL is getting initialized. You'll see the analysis step for me is the most interesting because you actually see the queries that you're running against your application in real time and whether or not your application has vulnerabilities. So that's really cool. Okay, so I'm going to scroll up here and just show you what you've already glanced at, which is this pull request is about introducing a bookstore rating feature of the bookstore application. It will allow customers to rate books they've read which could help other customers decide what book to purchase. This feature could also help the bookstore track customer preferences and make recommendations about new titles. So I only read that to you because it was the first time I was reading it myself. But it's pretty interesting that you can, provide such limited context to the large language model. It will synthesize that and publish it back for you. Now, one thing that I'll say, since we're here now, and since we kind of finished the demonstration in this repository, is this. Somebody was calling out CoPilot X. One of the capabilities under the CoPilot X hood is, or one of the planned capabilities rather, that's in technical preview, is an experience that as I'm writing a pull request comment, like that opening comment you saw before, we do use GPT-4, a more advanced, as you know, maybe version of, of GPT, to basically suggest what you would comment in the first place. So this is something that we built ahead of that, just to use in-house. But obviously, this is like a retroactive context. And what you'll get with CoPilot X and that PR feature is it will manifest directly as you're writing the PR in the first place. And so that's pretty powerful. And you won't have to manage the scaffolding of actions, which I think at this point is fairly lightweight. But but it's just something else to think about, something else to worry about, which you probably don't need on your plate. Okay, I'm going to just take 10 seconds here to just poke back in the chat and see what folks were talking about. All tech is magic, Dan. I couldn't agree more. Seeing some folks. Awesome. Christopher, you're the best. Thank you. Sharing the context there. No love for lean startups. Automagically is not incorrect language. Right on. So you all are having a little bit of fun talking about automation and the impact of some of these tools in your own workflows. So I'm grateful for that. Thank you for just continuing to participate. I think the last thing I want to share with you is what's the developer experience. So I'm going to go ahead and close out all these remaining tabs and talk about what the developer experience is. I think it's AI PR test. Yeah, so let's talk about what the developer experience is for the developer who actually built this automation in the first place, right? And so we did three things, right? We started out just testing some automation in our repo, and then we tested that in a more production-like environment. And I think the third thing that we're going to do together is actually build this integration with one another, okay? And check out the developer experience there. And there's a lot that's happening implicitly, right? The use of Codespaces, you'll see the use of CoPilot Actions under the hood, running on Linux machines that are hosted on GitHub infrastructure. And so hopefully that has been interesting to you. Imani, I see you hanging out there, and Ken is looking for a hoodie. So Ken, if you can guess the number that is going to come out of CoPilot in just a few minutes here, we will send you a GitHub hoodie to your home. How's that, sir? We'll give you an opportunity to win a hoodie. I'm going to write that down. Cool. Okay. So let's go ahead and do so. Everybody's guessing 42. I don't think it's gonna be 42, but we'll see. So as a developer, when I land inside a repository, again, one of the first things I'll do is look to spin up my IDE, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and go to my Codespaces. And in this case, I actually did already spin up a Codespace called Friendly Space Train on this Galaxy Live branch. I don't know if I trust this one. Let's go ahead and open it and see what's already been done there together. So it's already on warm standby. So you saw how much faster that was. And I do see some of the files open here. And so that's okay as long as there's no code changes, because I want to do those code changes live with you all so you can see the experience, watch me sweat a bit. And, and again, it's the kind of the magic, the power of CoPilot live. So everybody's dropping numbers in there. That's hilarious and fun. So appreciate you. Actively participating there. Cool. Okay. So Christopher is like, Kevin, you're destroying the chat. Everybody's just spamming numbers now. And I see Jessi smiling as well. Okay. So let's go ahead and do this together. Let's take a moment to maybe just acknowledge how this action manifested as that. And so this action YAML file is a definition of an action. So this action YAML file is a definition of an action. So pretty simply, you can name your action, you can give it a description, and you can provide inputs, which is obviously incredibly important. We use the OpenAI key input for something obvious, which is to make a request out to OpenAI. And then you use the repo token to take the synthesis that's output from an OpenAI and plug that back into the PR. and then you get a little bit of context about, how that action's actually run itself. Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and do this. Let me just make sure I have a terminal available to me should I need that, and make sure there's no changes here. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so for me personally, one of the things, I see this is yellow down here. Okay, so now it's turned on. So for me personally, one of the first things that I always do, especially lately when I'm doing dev, is I'll always make sure that I have CoPilot installed. In this case, I've already installed it manually, but I definitely encourage you to go to the marketplace, install CoPilot if you have access to the service before you begin your development. So you can go ahead, go back to the files, and maybe one of the first things that we want to do together, I forgot to show it to you in the other repo, but we'll talk about it now. One of the first things that you may want to do when you're maybe adopting Codespaces for the first time or creating a project is, again, codifying that project's dependencies such that you can run the application really easily, the first time you load it. So I don't have to come over to your desk and be like, hey man, what is this crazy error message that I'm getting? And you respond and you say something like, oh, well, you have to install this thing that I remember because I joined 3 years ago and somebody told me when I joined then. Like that problem kind of goes away when you codify the dependencies, which is less job security, but obviously a better experience for developers. Cool. So let's go ahead and add a customization. I think in this case, if I'm not mistaken, I want to do something like add VS Code. And I think I want to just make sure that I have, okay, so this is interesting. So CoPilot's already looking over my shoulder and providing suggestions for what I might like to see in this VS Code object here. In this case, it's extensions and the Docker file definition. For me, I'm going to keep it pretty light today. So I'm just going to have extensions there. I don't know how many times I've done that, extensions. And I'm going to add a colon there and then pass this array. In this case, it's just going to be GitHub. Can't misspell it there without that camel case. GitHub.CoPilot. And now what this is going to do is every time a developer launches this code space from my repo, I have this extension pre-installed, right? Pretty simple stuff. Similarly, if I wanted to define the ports that are automatically forwarded to, so in our last app, there was actually a definition in a dev container which forwarded the ports to 8080 by default. That's really useful and nice. So I don't need to know how to run it. It just automatically runs. Similarly, I might have something that reads my package management system and allows me to actually execute that when I open the code space. So fun times. Definitely encourage you to leverage the dev container capability, and Codespaces is a really nice kind of accelerator for getting productive or being productive or just making changes on the fly to your app. So that's really useful. Okay, now I realize we have about 5 to 7 minutes left together in the demo portion. Then we're going to open up for, I think, Q&A and open discussion. So just kind of checking in with you all on where we are. We have approximately 5 to 7 minutes to implement some features together, and then we will open up for Q&A. So let's see some folks in the chat here. Where's my hoodie? Sanara Lee. And I see some folks personally keep using CoPilot. Is CoPilot available in other SCM tools? AI upscaling. AI remembers our comments. Wonderful. Okay, so great conversation happening in the background. All right, friends, so let's do this. Don't get, I know y'all are developers, so you're not intimidated by code generally, but just don't get intimidated about the idea that like you have to read the code to understand what the heck's happening here. All I wanted to show you was what's happening on line 6 is, because it's an action, you basically have this try catch block. So there it is. So, from there to line 75, try catch. I was actually demoing. I can actually remove this now because I was testing something earlier. Yeah, so all you have is a simple try catch block. Okay. Okay, I'm in the wrong file. I was wondering what is going on there. You have this try catch block. It defines the logic of what happens in your action. To keep it super simple, we get the action event, and here it is. We're just kind of like capturing that stuff, assigning it to variables that'll be available to me. And now what I want to do is when I have the output of my PR, so the context of the PR, I want to send that to OpenAI, right? So I'm going to go ahead and write a quick function that allows me to do that. So I might say something like, okay, I might say something exactly like that. So what you might have noticed was that my inline CoPilot was already beginning to suggest implementations here. And so what I did was I hit Control Enter. That opened up this side tab that describes to me the different available options. And so let's check out the first one here. It says const response equals OpenAI create completion. It has all the attributes that you need for a successful request to OpenAI. Okay. Using DaVinci, it says, so this is the magic under the hood, by the way. Like if you want to see a way that just, I don't know if it's clever or not, probably not very clever, but in my dull mind, it was, what's this pull request about and how can it impact my application? Here's the PR title with this PR body. So that's as simple as it is. It's just going to convert the input of a PR into plain text and then send it off to the large language model for synthesis. And so this is really most of the magic that was happening under the hood there. But of course, what you're noticing with CoPilot is it actually knew that the OpenAI SDK was already pulled in to my app. And so I have OpenAI already getting pulled in as an app dependency. If I didn't, it would also ask me to first define that as a dependency of my app, and then it would allow me to call it. So I'm going to go ahead and accept this solution. Right on. So I see that. And now the second thing that I'm going to do, the second and last thing actually that I want to do is I want to call the OctoKit SDK, so the GitHub SDK, to take the output from OpenAI and post that back in the PR. And so I'm just going to do my inline tabbing here. So this is typically my experience as I'm doing my development is like I just hit tab enter as I'm expressing what I'd like to see implemented. And I obviously have familiarity with what a reasonable implementation looks like. And so this looks reasonable to me. This function is asynchronous and it's going to comment back in my PR as the, as a GitHub action. And it's just going to post back the comment which comes earlier from this create completion. So that's how the comment's made. It says this pull request is about, and then it takes some of the text. Okay, so if you've endured up to now and you're like, this is way too technical, why are we looking at code? That's it. I think that's all the code that we're going to look at together. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to roll the dice here. And actually, let's do this. Before I do that, give me a random number less than 1,000. Give me... Oh, did anyone guess one? Were there any ones? I doubt it. I saw a lot of 42s. So we're going to go back in the chat there and see if there's any ones. Carlos, I saw you were first, but a little too late there, my friend. Okay, so let's go ahead. I kept true to my word. I'm glad I remembered that. And let's check the Git status. Git add all Git's commits. Complete integration. This thing is in my face here, but let's see. Oh, there we go. Git push origin, Galaxy, world. Sorry, I just can't see. There we go. Git push origin. Cool. All right. So now that we've done that, why don't we do this together? We'll go back to that Galaxy test. How about AI integration test together? And this is the last thing we're going to do, and then we're going to open up for Q&A. So I'm going to go to my .GitHub workflows. I'm going to go back to AI test, and I'm going to run this now. Instead of pointing at the V1 branch of this action, I'm going to point at Galaxy. What was it called? Galaxy Live or Galaxy Tests? Does anyone remember? I'll look for the chat here. Sam giving me some tips. Thank you, sir. Does anyone remember what the original branch was called? Live. Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and roll with that then. Push back to the main branch. Go ahead and commit. Okay, and now we're going to open a pull request. Again, so I'm going to go back and just show you what that experience is. I'm going to scaffold out maybe like, I don't know. Let's do infrastructure as code scan. So configure that workflow. Commit the changes to a new branch, and we're going to call it Galaxy Live Test in Prod. Going to propose those changes. This is a live test of the AI integration to reduce IAC scanning. And let's see if we're able to make that change successfully. So the PR should trigger the workflow. And then let's track this workflow executing in our live logs here. What's interesting, you also see the Prisma cloud scan. So it's looking for infrastructure as code. I don't have any infrastructure as code in this repository. So here are the live logs. What's really nice is you saw, like, because I'm using the native secret score, we automatically redact the secrets out of the workflow logs. So you'll never like find my secret output there. Let me go back to the PR, see if something's failing. But our integration works, friends. So congratulations. This pull request introduces AI integration in your app, and it helps detect security risks, et cetera, et cetera. So that's it, friends. That's all I had to share with you. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I had a ton of fun doing it. And thank you, of course, to Jessi and Christopher for moderating the chat. And
beautiful.
Mr. Saad as
Thank
well.
you both for everything. That was fantastic. So there's been a ton of chat and a ton of Q&A as the both of you have seen. I want to start with by far, I think, the most important question, especially since we had that light mode, dark mode debate, is GIF. How do we pronounce that?
If you're asking my heart, it's GIF. If you're asking me so I don't get made fun of on a call, it's GIF.
I'm going with GIF, like peanut butter. I think wasn't there like the founder or something, or the person who like invented that technology said it was like peanut butter. That's how I try to remember anyway.
It's graphical, not graphical. So that's my heart says.
I'm personally a hard G. I understand what the creator said. The creator's wrong. That's just all there is.
It's the people's technology now.
Yeah. Cool. So let's start here. When it comes to GitHub Copilot, obviously a lot of interest in GitHub Copilot. What does Copilot see with your context? So like, is it seeing the entire code base? Is it, seeing just a handful of files? Like, what is it able to base its suggestions on?
I'm happy to take that one if that's okay.
Yeah, please do.
Right on. So one of the things that I did to just illustrate the answer, because I tend to be a little long-winded, I apologize in advance. One of the things that I was doing in order to ensure that Copilot had a very high probability of success was I opened up another file that actually had a definition of the functions I was writing in the other file. And so that's to answer that Copilot has a combination of the context provided by the files that are open in your IDE at the time that you're using it. And it also has two directions that it looks. So it looks forward for context into your source code file, and it looks backwards into what you've already written in order to increase the probability that its suggestion is going to be accepted, which is kind of the key metric that we use to track whether or not there's a quality output, which is the acceptance rate.
Okay.
And it's not your source code. So we're not training the model on your source code. Yes, I think that's like a key point. Make sure folks know. Thank you.
Yeah, that's always one of the biggest questions that I get asked. So Jeremy, thank you for that. I also want to, and I'll find the name here in a minute, but pivoting real quickly to Codespaces. So one of the things that you demoed is that you made a change to the service, and then you were able to like open that up in a browser to be able to like actually see it and test it and so forth. Is that going to be public, or is it private specific to you? Is there anything that I can do if I need to maybe share that out with my team and allow them to play around with that as well?
Jessi, do you want to take that one?
Yeah. So you have controls over that for the enterprise, right? So by default, it's going to be public or private. And you do have the ability to set up some forwarding so that if you would like to have it able to share just to people who have access to that repository, you're also able to do that. Kevin, anything else you would want to add to that?
I think that's good. Christopher?
Cool. And that was Brett that asked that question. I now want to go back to Copilot here real quick, and I apologize for kind of bouncing back and forth. There's so many questions that have been asked. It's been fantastic. But going back to Copilot, one of the other questions that had come up is it possible to train Copilot on our code and be able to like show it our code base so we can get a better sense of what it is that we're doing and how we do it?
So there's, yeah, so I think so I think the answer here is, and probably what everybody's like anxious for me to get to, if I may, is so we are working on the ability to increase to train the model to allow you to bring your own source code to influence the model's output. It's not something that's available today, and it would be obviously explicitly opt-in by organizations whether or not they want their own specific version of CoPilot suggestions. One of the ways that I've seen folks work around this, and I just had a conversation about an hour ago, or an hour and a half ago now, I guess. And if you wanted something like a junior developer to have access to like gold standard or boilerplate code, and you don't have the ability to train a custom model yet, there's an idea that you might be able to like open up a separate file that has all those gold standards defined and allow that to influence the context of your suggestions. I'd love to hear what this group like thinks about that idea. It's kind of a hack, but it's using what's available to you now, since we don't train on organization source code today.
Cool. I also do want to add in a real quick plug for GitHub Next. So if you go there, you can actually see some of the different things that are being planned as part of CoPilot X and the upcoming features there as well. So definitely go check out GitHub Next. Just go to your favorite search engine, GitHub Next, and you'll be able to find that there. Going back to projects, because I want to make sure that we also pay a little bit of attention to projects as well. Vincent asked a question. I'm going to kind of slightly put a spin on it. Is what do you suggest for templating? So let's say that, we've got 5 or 6 projects that we're all going to be spinning up. They're going to be relatively similar. Like, how do we then template that so that way we all have like some starting foundation that we can build from?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm glad it's a very timely ask, because we literally just staff shipped templates for projects this week. So that is coming very soon. So stay tuned, watch the blog, watch the changelog. I'm guessing it's going to come out pretty soon, because we're getting it right now for our staff ship.
Fantastic. And by the way, true story, I honestly did not know that had just staff shift, and Jessi did not set me up here. So that was absolutely perfect. Let's see. I'm kind of flipping back. Gershom asked a great question, which is one that I'm seeing popping up quite a bit. And I'm again going back to CoPilot. Everybody loves CoPilot. But I'm again going back to CoPilot, which is, what are some tips for getting the most out of it? That obviously this is a new tool. It can sometimes behave a little bit like IntelliSense, but not like IntelliSense. Like, how do we get the most out of it as developers, as people that are writing code?
Kevin, I'm going to let you take that one.
Oh boy. I guess I
can also offer my own sort of.
I'd love to hear your opinions, Christopher. You got it.
Yeah. So the couple of things I would mention, number one is, if you're using languages where there's a lot of publicly available code, CoPilot is going to be able to give you the best suggestions. So if you're doing Java, if you're doing C#, if you're doing JavaScript, Python, those types of languages, then the suggestions that you're going to wind up getting from CoPilot are going to be the best. The next is, if CoPilot isn't doing what you would expect it to do, is maybe go back, especially if you're doing it with a comment. So let's say I'm saying, hey, create a class that does X, Y, and Z, and it generates some code for me, and I look at it and go, that's not quite right. Go back to your comment and just redefine or add on a little bit of extra context to kind of help point CoPilot in the right direction. That if CoPilot has way too much room, it doesn't quite know what to do. And sometimes the suggestions are going to be relatively generic. If you trim it down a little bit, pare it down a little bit, then it's going to be able to follow along. And then the last big thing that I would say, and this kind of goes to Kevin's little behind the scenes trick, is CoPilot will watch what you're doing and it will make suggestions based on that. Now, I want to make sure that I'm clear about that it's not customizing a brand new model specifically for you. It's not learning from you per se, but if it sees that you've done a particular pattern 3 or 4 times elsewhere inside of another file, and then you go to do something similar, it will follow that pattern that it's seen. So the more that it's seen, the better it's going to be able to do what you want. So at a high level, really just give it more context. And if you're sticking to really popular languages, it's going to be able to do the best there. Okay. Let's see. What else do I want? What else do I want? Gosh, there's so much in here. Was there a question that one of the two of you saw that you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, I saw one just now, as a matter of fact, and that is, why are you wearing 2 watches? I guess that so that you're always on time.
No, so I wear this just for, this is my Apple Watch, and I wear this for, just like normal fitness stuff. And I wear this because I need some level of style. This is a Swatch. Back when I was a kid, these were really, really popular. And I couldn't afford them when I was a kid. And now that I'm an adult, I can afford them. So yeah, so this is actually the Berlin specific Swatch. So
very cool.
So
and lots of love from the chat.
That's that.
We got a question about, you had your bookmarks bar showing when you were demoing, and you had that monorepo bookmark up there. So somebody wanted to talk about monorepos, and I thought that was a decent thing to maybe bring up in the context of what you were working on. If you had one thing to say about monorepos and developer velocity.
If I had one thing to say, though, it's been a little while since that was like the first bookmark that the second bookmark I ever made, I think, when I joined GitHub. Yeah. So it's been a little while, but what would I say about monorepos is try to avoid them to the best of your ability, because they cause lots of challenges.
Yeah, but that's we can't say that. We've got one of the biggest Ruby monoliths.
Yeah, well, you can also, so that's true, but I think for our new services, we have adopted more of a microservice architecture, and have kind of broken some of that stuff out because it's created a lot of overhead. Like when we started talking about the old experience developers had, and this is not necessarily to that point specifically, but like it used to take 10 hours to get productive with GitHub. And now, with so many levels of refinement, including, I would imagine, re-architecting the application itself, it takes less. So I don't know. That's my poor attempt at trying to defend myself.
I was going to throw out pre-builds, and that's kind of what you were hinting at there, right? Pre-builds are a godsend. The larger your code base gets, the more complex your code base gets. Being able to have that build sit and waiting in the wings so that you're not spending so much time bootstrapping really can be helpful. That's something we rely on heavily here. I could go on and on about kind of organizational stuff, but I know that's not what the focus is today, so I won't do that. But it was a good question, and I wanted to make sure we at least touched on it.
There's another question that just came in here, and this isn't necessarily like an overly technical question, but it's something I'm willing to bet that there's a fair amount of the audience that's interested in, and I'm actually going to expand upon it. So Braden asked the question, is it possible for coding to become like an entirely automated profession? And then at a higher level, like what advice for like somebody wanting to become a developer would you give them would you give them today?
Yeah, I don't think we can ever automate away the judgment capacity of humans, right? You still are an expert on something, or you are becoming an expert on something. Prove me wrong. That's great. But I think there's still, like I kind of mentioned, the idea of getting to focus on the business logic, on what's really important for customers, instead of just doing the boilerplate things. I think that's really what the focus here is, not like making development a thing of the past and we all go do different jobs, right? And I think that ties in really nicely to the idea of how do I learn and grow as a developer using something like CoPilot, because it can really help you explore things in an accelerated way that you otherwise before would have had to be stuck in the docs, doing a lot of training, right? You can just kind of jump in and start playing around, and yeah, maybe you're still going to make mistakes, but you get a little bit of that like fail fast, right? Where you can get suggestions, play around with it, and start trying things out without having to be, like I said, so stuck in the docs and the really learning piece of it. And Kevin, I don't know if you have anything else you would want to add to that.
I think you nailed that question, Jessi.
You drilled that question. Yeah, that was exactly. Yeah.
Near and dear to my heart, as somebody who didn't, go to school for this, anything like that. It's a godsend. I can learn a lot.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. So Kevin, Jessi, thank you so very much for everything that that you shared today. Just a real quick glance in the chat shows that everybody loved the session. So take a minute and kind of go see what's been going on in there. To everybody that tuned in, thank you so much. We've got sessions, of course, for the rest of today, and then we're talking about security tomorrow, and then something else on Friday that sadly I forgot. Somebody else will remember. Somebody will put it into the chat. But yeah, so thank you to everybody for tuning in. This is GitHub Galaxy. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.